And Carl and Larry were one of the first two I met at the university. Larry came from Ohio with a doctorate from Pennsylvania State, and he came to MU in terms of art education and the art department itself. And he grew and grew and grew into that department where he became the chair of the art department. And he was there for many, many years.
Many years, 53 years. 53 years. Well, no, not 53. I've been in Columbia for 53 years.
Carl and Larry and I, we've known each other for about 50 years.
Yes.
So basically, we definitely have.
We were youngsters then.
We were very, very young at that time, extremely so. But in any case, I want to only say that Larry received the outstanding prestigious award, the Kempner Award at MU, which is for outstanding teaching. And as I say, it's one of the most prestigious awards at MU, the Kempner Award. And certainly I'm very proud that he received that award during his time as professor at MU. He did a show here once before. Before we moved over here in the Classic Hall, when we were on the first floor of the library. That's where we began this art Ashby-Hodge Gallery. And you did a show for us. I think I have the date back in 1997.
Yeah.
You did a show. And you'll see if the show in Gallery 1 today, if you see that show. And we have two works right out here in the lobby. Come on in, folks. Come on in. We have. Yeah, there he is. You're in the right place.
Okay, thank you.
We had two works from that first show that are out here in the gallery, out here in the lobby right here. And as I say, who says art cannot change? Because when you see his new artwork in Gallery 1 and what you have out here in out here in the lobby, you can see he has made some revolutionary changes. And I am very pleased to see that development in terms of, although I love these pieces out here very much, as you know, Winnie for Godot I like very, very much. But basically, when you see the show in Gallery 1, you will realize that it's based on a lot of quotations from a lot of different authors, very definitely. And probably one of your favorite quotes is from Margaret Atwood. In the end, we all become stories. And so tonight and this afternoon, we are going to hear part of Larry's story here this afternoon. So we thank you for coming, and we welcome both Carl and Larry here today. Yes,
One brief footnote, and that is that you keep referring to it as Gallery 1, and it has been renamed the Geist Gallery.
Yes, but you know, my name is Joe Geist, in case you don't know that. and as I say, I still call it Gallery 1.
Humility is admirable.
Thank you for the reference. Yes, very definitely. Okay, Larry, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Joe. I appreciate your introduction and your friendship. And thank you all for coming this afternoon.
I should say we're going to have, if there's any questions throughout, we'll have questions later on, whenever you want to start asking for the questions from the students.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to tell you, at almost 87 years old, I never expected to be showing new work in a gallery. Perhaps old work, but not new work. And what I thought I would do first, and Joe has mentioned a few things, I thought I'd give you a little of my history, just how I got to be here, why I'm sitting here in front of you. I was born in a little town in Wapakoneta, Ohio, and I think it was 7,000 people. And so those of you in Fayette, I don't know how many people live in Fayette now, but I was raised in a small community and appreciate your town. It was midway between the Great Depression and World War II. And like so many families, my family had its trials and tribulations of surviving the Depression. They were farmers, so we never went without food, but at the same time, I don't remember, but I know my parents, when they married, they couldn't find an apartment, they couldn't afford an apartment, they couldn't even, let alone afford a house. So they moved in with my grandparents. And I found that, that was very lucky for me because I loved having my grandparents there. And one of my earliest art experiences that I can vaguely remember, when you go back like that, you're not sure whether you actually remembered or people told you it so many times that it becomes part of your memory. But at any rate, going into the kitchen with my grandmother, and we would draw together. And when it came to coloring, I wanted her to color the backgrounds in, and I would color the figures. And my excuse was that I knew that I didn't feel I could keep the backgrounds even enough. The blue sky, the green grass, and that. So I wanted her to do, because I knew she could do it much better than me. And of course, the bottom line of it was, I found it boring putting in all that blue sky and green, and I was just pleased that she would do that. And being, I suppose, some people, I think one of my great aunts said, well, Larry's going to be a spoiled child, was a little bit spoiled by my grandmother. My parents were always very supportive with my interest in art. And my mother was a pianist and organist, and my father was a mechanic and machinist. And I realized later on he also was kind of what we call outsider artist. He loved collecting stuff and putting stuff together, sometimes to the chagrin of my mother. He loved going to auctions and even rummaging through whatever kind of objects he could find that were attractive to him. And I remember one time going home, and in the middle of the backyard was a pedestal porcelain sink. And I said, Dad, why do you have that porcelain sink in the middle of the yard? And my dad had very warm and kind eyes, and he looked down at me and he said, Larry, that's not a bathroom sink, that's a bird bath. And that bird bath stayed in our backyard. Another time he came home, he had seen where an old Victorian house was being demolished. So he knew that it would be things that he might like. So he went, and one thing he found was this large arc of a stained glass window that probably was over the transom, over the front door or someplace in the house. And the men that were doing the demolishing, he said, could he have that window? And they said, oh, well, yes, we're just going to take it to the dump or whatever with all the other stuff that we have here. And so he brought it home, and again, it was like, what are you going to do with this large stained glass window? Now, it was not a fine stained glass window, it was not leaded, but it had wooden seams that held the glass together. But it was all there, all the glass. And so he finally did decide it probably wasn't any place in the house to put this window. So he had a little garden behind the garage, but the garage had nothing on it but a white wall. So this was perfect. So for as long as I can remember, and for all I know, still hanging on that house is that stained glass window on the back of the garage. My interest was always in reading and drawing. Those were my two loves. And I would spend a lot of time in the house, in my room, reading. I loved making little, I suppose you'd call them boy caves now. I mean, putting chairs together and covering them with blankets, going inside with a flashlight to either draw or paint. And I remember once, not once, many times, my father coming upstairs and saying, "Larry, the sun is out. You need to go out and get some sun. You know, you just don't stay in your room all the time." But it really took my attention. I think the only time I heard my mother discourage me about it was when she realized I was using the sheets on the bed to make large drawings. And so she did put a halt to that. But as I recall, or I don't think I actually got punished for it, what I got was large sheets of paper with the note, "Don't draw on the sheets anymore. Here's paper for you to draw on." So the family was, like I said, all very supportive of me. So there's no wonder I developed a love for making art. Elementary school was really very enjoyable for me because we had an art teacher that ran a special art class. And so from grades, we didn't have a kindergarten, but from grades 1 through 6, I was in this special art class. And it was all students. It wasn't that everyone had such great talent, but everyone loved making art. And so you could, as long as you loved making art and were willing to do it, you could stay in this class with her. High school then was something different. We didn't even have an art teacher. There was no art program. So for 4 years, I felt kind of isolated in terms of being able to go to an art class or something like that. And I still would do work at home, but I missed it. And it also, there wasn't much of an appreciation for art within the school. Obviously, they didn't have an art teacher or an art department. Then I went to Otterbein College, which, again, was a small college in a small community, very much like CMSU here. But they did have an art department. And so I majored in art and also got a teaching certificate. So after I finished college, I thought, well, I guess I'll teach. I was very much thinking I wanted to be an artist, so I'll have to admit I wasn't quite sure how I was going to feel about actually teaching. I mean, I had student teaching, but I really had not had any real experience in teaching. But I took a position in Tiffin, Ohio, and I taught some elementary and junior high. But again, I felt very isolated because although I love college, and all of a sudden there were people who appreciated the fact that one had a little art talent. And, when I went to teach, I didn't have a community of artists anymore around me. And so I thought, well, I'm not sure. Also, we got paid nothing. I rented a room for $5 a week. And I thought, I don't think I want to spend the rest of my life living in someone else's bedroom and going to the little diner down the street for their 95-cent blue plate special. So my decision wasn't to change because of the teaching of art or the children. It was because I thought I can't live like this the rest of my life. So I decided, I think two things I'd really enjoy doing. I always wanted to travel. And I thought, well, I could join the Peace Corps, or I could go to graduate school. And so I didn't know what to do. So I thought, I'm going to apply to both. So I applied to the Peace Corps, and I applied to graduate school. And I decided whichever one I got first, I would take that as an omen. Well, the graduate school applications almost came immediately. So then I focused on on going to graduate school. And I had asked some people. I think I applied to Ohio State, Columbia University, Penn State, Florida State, I think 5 different schools. And fortunately, I got accepted at them. And then I had to decide which I wanted to go to. And I thought, well, I'm going to look at their applications. The shortest application would be the best way to go. And fortunately, I went to pick Penn State. At that time, there was a gentleman there called Victor Lowenfeld, who was kind of the grandfather of art education in the United States. And I majored, but I spent summers on my master's, and then before I quite finished my master's, I decided I would stop teaching and go full-time to graduate studies, finish my master's, then got my doctorate in painting, printmaking, art education with a minor in philosophy. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, one thing about graduate school, if any of you, and I'm sure many of you have been in graduate school, it's a very all about me situation. You know, all the attention is on you, wanting to help you develop your skills. And I also had the good fortune of working for one of the premier researchers in art education as his research assistant. So when I left, I went first to Indiana University, but I was hired as an art educator and a researcher. And after 4 years, I thought, you know, I love teaching art ed, you know, but I miss being around art people too, because that was totally in the College of Education. I had no real relationship with the art department or with art students in general. And in 1971, I was given an opportunity to come to MU and for a joint appointment, which was going to be 50% College of Education and 50% the art department. And I thought, well, that's absolutely perfect. Those are my 2 big loves, the teaching and doing the studio. And so I came to MU, and the only thing I found, though, is that when you have a joint appointment like that, you're working for 2 different deans, 2 different chairs, with different expectations in both colleges. The education had certain expectations of what research meant. The art department had. So needless to say, they kept me very busy. But it was good. I really enjoyed it because I would do these things. But by the time I retired about 22 years ago now, I was totally burnt out. It was like a door closed. I did not want to do any. People would say, well, would you like to watch student teachers? Would you like to come to the Art League and teach an art class? I say, I don't want to teach again. I don't want to make art again. I want to do something else. And of course, at that time, both Carl and I were going to be retired. And I said, you know, we both love traveling. So for 18 years, we traveled the world and had a wonderful time and a wonderful life together. In fact, this year is our 51st anniversary of being together. And I would go to galleries and to museums in the traveling, and every time I'd go into it, you know, there was a little something that nudged me, you know, or maybe more, a little bit of guilt hit me. You know, you were an artist. Don't you think you should be making some art? And you know, I could feel the little tinge in me, but then by the time I got home, we started planning our next trip, and I kind of left it go. I thought that I probably wouldn't be making art again. But then 5 years ago, Melissa Williams has a gallery in Columbia. She had been out to the house and saw my work and said, "Larry, would you like to have a show? I would like to give you one." And my first reaction, I said, "Melissa, I haven't done any work for 18 years. And she said, "Well, we could use work that you've already done." And I said, "Well, you know, if you're going to put work in a gallery, the expectation is they assume you're going to, it has to be for sale. I mean, they're not just being nice to artists and having the work there. They would like very much for you to be able to sell your work." I said, "Anything hanging in the house, I'm not interested in selling. But I have closets of art if you're interested in looking at it, and if you think you can put together a show with that art, that's fine." And so I had the show, and before I had it, she said, "Larry," she said, "now I'll need a bio and an artist statement from you." And I thought, oh, good grief. I've written a lot of artist statements and bios. They're all in the flat file someplace, so I know I can find one. So I went in and I opened the flat files and started going through them, and I found old bios and old artist statements, so I got them out and revised them. But in doing it, I came across 3 collages that I had literally started when I was in graduate school. And I thought, you know, maybe I should just finish these up and see what happened. And so I kind of I had a studio at home that was being used mostly for storage. And so I set up, I got all my tools and papers and pencils and inks and markers and everything out to use. And I started working on them. And it was the first time I'd used any gold leaf. And so that was kind of the little new element in it. But I finished them, and I thought, well, you know, they don't look too bad. And so I took them to Melissa and said, you know, would you like to put these in the show? And she did. And I guess much to my pleasure, people were coming up and saying, you know, I really kind of like what you're doing now. And I thought, well, maybe I should do more. That feels kind of good. And I kind of enjoyed doing those collages. And so it was very strange. I can't totally describe it to you, but that passion just all of a sudden flowed back into me. And I thought, I'm going to make more art. But part of it was there was no pressure on me. I didn't have to have it ready to put into shows and exhibits and ship stuff out. And I could just do it for myself. And I decided as Joe says, the work changed. I was doing big paintings. Now I'm working, the largest thing may be 8 by 10. And I thought, well, I think I'll keep doing collages, but where to go from this, you know, with it. And so again, I went back to the old file, and I came across a whole stack of etching proofs. And, you know, when you're making an etching, you will proof it periodically and then make changes and things like that. So they're not something that you're going to be exhibiting or matting and framing. They're just kind of an interesting later on process. You see how this print, how it came about by looking at your process. And I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take some of these and just deconstruct them and put them back together in different ways. And I have this gold foil that I'm using. I can use some of it. I got out the inks, the watercolors, and I started reassembling them. And there are 2 of the collages that are in the show that actually come from that, where they're actually part of old prints that I've cut up. And it wasn't that I took one and used it as a puzzle and tried to put it back together a different way. They're pieces from all different proofs, different plates. And some of them were were intaglios, so they had color in them. And some of them were just the standard black and white. I thought, well, I'm just going to do a whole series of collages, and this kind of started me out on the series bit. I can work so long doing one thing, and then I like to change it to something else. But you'll see on the titles often it says series with a number, which indicates how many were, what that number within the series that I have. And so I made all these different collages, and while I was doing it, I remembered how fascinated I got. In our house, we have 2 floors of Mexican tile. And evidently, when the architect, the tiles came raw tile. They're kind of pinkish tan looking. We did not own the house at that time, but what we were told is that what he did was stain them by thinning down motor oil and a rag and rubbing them just randomly all over the tiles, just to create some kind of... And of course that would soak into the tile, and then on top of it he would put a finish. And over the years, we've lived in this house for 40 years now, people walking that, it wears a little bit on the tile. So you have the marks from the motor oil, and you also have just the wear marks. So you have quite a bit of change in pattern and design. And there was one tile in particular that I kept looking at. And I could see this man and cat staring back at me. Now, the architect did not try to make images. He was just putting texture and stains on the tile. And I thought, what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a photograph of that tile, and I'm going to bring it to life the way I see it. And so this is the first one. I don't know. It's kind of somewhere you can actually see it. But I used minimum number of lines, but tried to make it so others could see this cat and man. But that was the first one. And so then I started taking photographs of all the tiles and seeing what image I could pull out. And in the process of doing it and reading some, I realized what it was pareidolia. Now, maybe you all know what pareidolia is. Most people have not been acquainted with it, the term. But it's seeing pattern in chaos. I mean, that's how it'd be described. And this is not something I came up with. I mean, artists have been using it for years. The surrealists used it a lot. A lot of them used this in terms of making marks and then trying to bring the marks alive. And so I did a whole series then of the tile, I call the tile series. And these were looking at the tiles. I would literally take and set the photo, this is a 5x7, most of them are 4x6 up. And I would just spend time looking at them and, in a sense, both waiting for them to speak to me and for me to understand what they were trying to say. Sometimes I automatically saw the images, what I thought were the images, and other times I would look at them, and finally sometimes I would say, well, I can't see anything in it. I put it away and then get it out again, and then something else would appear. And I don't know, the whole concept just became very intriguing to me. And we took a trip 3 years ago to Cairo. It actually was our third trip to Cairo. And I love going and seeing the old antiquities and visiting Giza and that. But what struck me on this last one was looking at the walls of Cairo. And you'll notice a number of them say French walls, Egyptian walls. And when we were there, I could see that there was a lot of pareidolia in these walls, with the stains, the peeling paint, sometimes just the construction falling apart, part of the plaster or whatever coming off. And so I started taking photographs of these walls, and I took them in Egypt, in Italy, and in France, and became obsessed with looking at them and looking at the pareidolia that you could see to bring out whatever I could find into in as far as the image was concerned. It's an interesting thing. I don't know, maybe all of you have done this. Well, you have already done this. I am sure when you were a child, that probably every one of you at some point was sitting outside and some adult or a brother and sister say, "Oh, look up there. You see in the clouds there's an elephant up there," or whatever. So that's pareidolia. So I'm still working on the wall series. I have probably done over 100 of them, and I probably have 1,000 photographs that I've used. I did find, as far as little process, that what you have to have if you want to overdraw or overpaint, it's for the material I use. You have to have something that's alcohol based. And then it was obviously water-based is not going to work at all. And so I have a large number of markers and pens that are alcohol-based. And so it will hold on the glossy surface. I think sometimes, like this one is minimal lines to bring it out. Other times I get so caught up into it that the whole drawing fills up it. You no longer even see anything of the photograph, the original photograph at all. It's completely covered. There's one in the show now. It's called Gulliver, and that one you see very little of the original photograph in it. I put up here just some of what they look like when I first start with them. So if you'd like to later on look at them, you can and see what you can see, because these have not been marked on at all. So you can see whether you can see it speak to you or not. Another series that I worked on was what I call the Gold series. And again, going back to these old flat files and the stuff that's in them, I came across, again, 4 8x10 black and white photographs that I had taken for a jewelry class. The assignment was go out anywhere outside this room and take photographs of something close up, 4 different things, and then bring them to class the next time. And what we were to look at them to find designs to use in jewelry, whether you're making a ring or a brooch or a slider or whatever, but see if you can base it on something, not trying to copy it, but just based on that design that you could see. And so I chose grass and weeds. So these 4 photographs were close-ups of clumps of grass and weeds. And one is basically all you really see are a few blades of grass. And I've always been very interested in negative space. That again, if I look out at you, I often will focus on the negative space, the space between you. And I find that is interesting as the figure space, And so when I looked at the photographs, I thought, they really have some really interesting negative space, and I can manipulate it however I want to. I mean, nothing is holding me to the image in the photograph. It's just a stimulus to start. And so I started looking and seeing how I could use the negative space formed by these leaves of grass. And later on it became flowers. And so I would develop the kind of the contour of the foreground, but then what I focused in was to make the negative space or the ground gold, and use gold leaf, because someone 40 years ago was kind enough to give me a cigar box full of gold leaf, but I'd never used it other than when I started on that collage earlier. And the only little problem I had was that I'd never been taught how to use gold leaf. I really didn't know. I just had a box. It had some gold leaf, some brushes, and some adhesive in it. And so I thought, well, where do you go? I went to YouTube. And I looked at any number of YouTube clips of how to apply gold leaf. And the way I ended up doing it then is, it's a little bit of a tedious process. You have to take your adhesive, you brush it on, but you brush it on very thinly and light. You can't have it thick at all with the gold leaf. And for me, I wasn't quick enough. I couldn't just say, well, I'm going to put the adhesive down all of the negative space. I could only do small portions because you put it down in a very thin layer, and then you have to wait at least 45 minutes to an hour for it to just become tacky. Just tacky enough that it's going to hold the gold leaf. If it's too liquid, you put the paper, it just slides around or it rips apart when you try to burnish it. So you do this part and this part and this part, and you build it up. And I found that while I was doing it, when I wanted to do little interior places especially, it was very hard to put in the gold leaf and not make it too thick. Because if it would be too thick and I'd press, let's say I have a little tiny rectangle here of negative space, I wanted to have gold. Put down the adhesive, I'd wait, but then when I try to press it in to adhere the gold leaf, it would kind of squish out. I couldn't keep good edges around it. And I found that very frustrating. And I'm sure if I was really, someone who had used gold leaf for a long time or had a good education in it, I probably would have been able to figure out how to do it. But I couldn't see it. So then I went to, what else could I use? And I went to Amazon. We now find Amazon has lots of answers for us. And I just looked up gold pens. And I found I could find an alcohol-based gold pen that had various tips to it. So I could have a very micro tip. So I could put just one little single dot of the gold down using the pen. And then it went from that very micro dot to a larger, almost marker-like that you could use with it. And the gold ink would kind of flow, so you don't see the individual marks. It flows over the surface. It has a little different look than the gold leaf, but they're very, very similar. And so you'll notice on some of them it will say, where it talks about media, it will say gold gel pen, or then some others say gold leaf. The other thing about gold leaf is it's so terribly thin that I really finally realized what I had to do was to put down the adhesive part and then carefully pick up the gold leaf and put it down, but I couldn't breathe. Because I'm looking like this, and my just not hard breathing, just a little bit of breath could blow it right out of your fingers because it's so fragile. So you just have to be prepared, take a deep breath when you're going to do it, and then you can put that down.
Is it costly?
No.
Okay.
You see the Buddhas in Thailand or wherever, they're covering them with gold leaf, but it is so thin. It really, one little sheet seems to have no weight to it at all, And also, a lot of it is made up of different alloys. The gold leaf, when you buy it, isn't always, like 24 karat gold. I mean, it's gold, and it looks like it, but it's not necessarily all real gold. So I thought actually last summer, or when the summer started, that I had done about 20 of them, I think. And I thought, well, I think I'm done with this series. And then we spent the summer or not the summer, the month of August in France. And we went to Giverny to see Monet's gardens. And we were there just when everything was in bloom. And the water lilies were blooming, and all of the. If you go to France, it's worth going to Giverny just to see those gardens. They're absolutely gorgeous. And so after I got over the initial, looking at the gardens, I started taking lots and lots of images of the florals part. And so when I came home. Actually, on the way home, I said, Carl, I'm going to start up that series again because I have all these images now. And he said, you're going to make more art? By that time, we had about 30 pieces of art framed and kind of lining the little gallery we have at home. And I said, well, yes, but that's the price you pay for marrying an artist. We do keep, and we do keep making art, even though I'd had 18 years of not making art. And the only thing else I wanted to tell you just briefly about is the narratives. How did the narratives come about? When I first started painting, I saw the work, like the large figures on these paintings, and I was very literal in the naming of it. I know this one says man and cat, but there was a narrative that went with it. It was boy and dog, girl and cat, In a sense, that was the narrative, but it really didn't give the viewer much more information about my thinking about the work. And so I thought, because of the process and seeing these images developed out, I really found that I would hear poetry and think of poetry, and I would think of haikus and stories. They all seemed to develop stories to me. And so when I'd finish, I'd go to Carl and I'd say, well, I want to show you this. I want to tell you about it, though. And I would, and then he finally said, Larry, you're going to have to write those down, because he said, I'm not going to remember them. And so I thought, well, I think I'm going to do that. So in a sense, what I feel the narrative is I've extended the title. So what I'm really wanting to do is to provide the viewer more information to use and set up like a conversation. You have the artwork, you have the verbal narrative, and you have the viewer. And what I hope to do is create a conversation among them. And at the same time, I want to stress that I think that each one stands on its own. I think aesthetically, I would hope the art stands on its own. It doesn't have to have the narrative. The poem doesn't have to have the artwork. Neither one is illustrating the other. And of course, the viewer brings all their life history to it. So that's another big element to it. And I think if you read the narrative and you can have a conversation with it, which means you have every right to have your point of view. If you see something totally different, that's fine. You don't have to go with the poem. You don't have to go with just what you're seeing. You make up your own story at that time. And let's see. I was going to tell you about how the show came about, but I think Joe pretty much said he came last year to a show I had at the Montminy Gallery and asked me if I would like to show here. And, like I said, it had been years since I'd had a show here. And Tyler came and looked at the work. I gave him, well, like I said, at that time I had about 350 pieces for him to consider. And he chose 34. So
Tyler's at 400.
Yeah.
Tyler's at 400 pieces.
Yeah, well, it is now 400 since Tyler's been there. But that's how the show came about. And so I hope you'll enjoy it. And please, if you have time, read the narratives and have a conversation with the work. They say, people have studied this, I guess, people spend a maximum of 17 seconds per artwork when they go through a gallery. Well, I'm asking the person a lot because I'm wanting you to stop. And rather than to say, all right, you're going to just have to look at the work that long, I'm going to give you something to read, and then I want you to take that back to the work that you're looking. So I'm going to try to hold you in the gallery as long as possible. Now, I'm not going to count, don't worry. When you go back to the gallery, I won't say, all right, you still have 5 more seconds to spend with that. But at any rate, does anyone have any questions?
You're still making art, right?
Oh, yes, I'm still.
Okay, good.
Carl just framed 2 more for me this morning. I have to thank him. Carl fills in the art world, he fills in for my grandmother. He does the things that I don't like doing, so he does all the framing and the cleaning of the glass and all that.
Nice.
That's very nice, and because I would not be doing this much work if I had to personally have to do the matting and framing myself. So I give him credit for that. Okay, any other questions?
I've stopped doing art also.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while. And I was interested in what happened that re-inspired you. I guess you said you found old material that you hadn't looked at in a long time, and
Right.
that got you started again?
Well, and the fact that I had the show, and that I suppose in some ways it was feeling the presence of people looking at the work, and it happened very rapidly. But yeah, 18 years without doing any art, and then spending, 4 to 5 hours at least every day in the studio. I'm fortunate I have my studio at home, so when I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is go look at the work that's in process or progress. And the last thing I do at night is I go back in the studio and look at the work. So I'm in touch with it all the time. Fortunately, it doesn't keep me awake at night.
But don't you think that the pressure to produce is part of the problem with finding oneself unable to produce anymore? Like, for me, knowing that I'm going to make something, but nobody's going to buy it or even want it, is enough to just stop me in my tracks and so what's the point in doing anything?
Well, I guess I feel very fortunate in that teaching at the university, I didn't have to sell anything.
Yeah.
So selling was, in fact, it was something strange that Melissa and I talked about, because she couldn't understand why I didn't want to sell the work that was in the house, you know. But I said, you know, I've never made a living by selling work. It's nice if someone wants to buy it, but that was the reason I'm making art is not at all to sell. It's kind of a nice byproduct if somebody wants to buy something, but it's immaterial to whether I make more art.
Mm-hmm.
So
I got too focused on the economy, on the economic side of it.
yeah.
Made me, completely has killed any desire.
Yeah, and I can understand that, Jeff. But like I said, I was fortunate that once I started in again, that was not all those pressures, anything like that was off of me. I make art now just because I want to make art, and like I said, I like it if somebody enjoys it. I enjoy putting it up and letting people see it. But I just go on. I'll go home now and make more art, regardless. Anyone else? Yes.
It's not a question, I just wanted to thank you for what a personal, intimate vision you've given us of your development as a person, as an artist. I've never had this kind of insight into an artist and the creative process that you've just given us. And I'm really
Thank you.
honored by your presentation. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think part of it is being old. I got a lot of history there now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen. If you have time, go back to the gallery and look at the work with maybe a new eye.
I would say go back to the gallery and see the goal. See the
Yeah.
goal. Go look at the goal that we talked about in the gallery. Thank you, Larry, very much.
Okay. You're welcome.
Sure. And